What if a simple request for orange juice exposed something much bigger? On a routine flight, one woman's quiet defiance unraveled a shocking truth about prejudice in plain sight. But what happened next? No one saw coming. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Maya Reynolds leaned back in her seat near the rear of the plane, exhaling softly. She wasn't particularly fond of flying, not because of fear, but because of the subtle discomfort of being stuck in an enclosed space with strangers for hours. Still, this was a necessary trip. Los Angeles was waiting. Dressed simply in a white t-shirt and faded jeans, her long dark curls were pulled back in a loose bun. She didn't draw much attention, just another passenger blending into the sea of travelers. The flight attendants had just begun their service, rolling carts down the narrow aisle, offering small plastic trays of prepackaged meals and an assortment of beverages. Maya adjusted her tray table, watching as a neatly dressed blonde woman across the aisle received a cup of freshly poured orange juice. It looked refreshing, the condensation beating against the plastic. When the attendant reached her row, Maya smiled politely. "Excuse me, could I have some orange juice, please?" The woman in the navy blue uniform barely spared her a glance. Her name tag read Karen Mitchell. There was something stiff about the way she moved, the sharp way she exhaled through her nose before responding. "I'm sorry, but orange juice is only served to business-class passengers," she said curtly. Maya blinked, caught off guard. She quickly glanced at the passenger across the aisle, still casually sipping her orange juice. Maya started, but Karen had already pushed the cart forward, ignoring her as if she hadn't spoken at all. A quiet irritation crept into Maya's chest, but she swallowed it down. She had learned long ago that calling attention to these moments rarely changed anything. Instead, she turned her focus back to Karen, watching her as she continued serving. The next few passengers in her row received their requested drinks without hesitation. Water, soda, coffee, and then, just a few seats ahead, another request for orange juice. "Of course, sir," Karen responded, her voice now sweet and polished, handing a plastic cup filled with the golden liquid to a man in a crisp dress shirt. Maya's stomach twisted. The man was sitting in economy class. He wasn't different from her, except for the fact that he was white. Her fingers curled slightly against her tray table. She had seen this before. Different settings, different people, but the same treatment. A quiet exclusion wrapped in professional courtesy. A refusal that could always be justified in a way that made you second-guess yourself. Maya exhaled slowly, training her expression to remain neutral. She wasn't going to make a scene. Instead, she listened. A few minutes later, Karen was speaking in hushed tones to another flight attendant near the galley. The clinking of ice and cups provided cover, but not enough to drown out the words. "I can't stand serving these kinds of people," Karen muttered, her voice carrying an unmistakable edge of disdain. Maya felt her pulse spike. There it was. Undeniable proof. Not a misunderstanding, not a simple oversight, but deliberate bias. It was so casual, so rehearsed, as if this was just another normal workday for Karen. A heat built in Maya's chest. Not just anger, but something deeper, something sharper. A memory of all the times she had experienced the same treatment. The times her mother had been ignored in stores. The times her father had been questioned more than others at airport security. It was always subtle, always deniable. She had let things slide before, not this time. Keeping her movements smooth and unhurried, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and opened the recording app. She tapped the button, then let the device rest inconspicuously on her lap. Karen moved past again, smiling at another white passenger, asking if they needed anything else. Maya kept recording. She would wait, observe. The truth had a way of revealing itself, and when it did, she would be ready. Maya sat quietly, her pulse humming beneath the surface of her skin. She felt unsettled, but kept her composure, remembering clearly her father's voice from when she was younger. He had always said, "No matter how angry or upset you become, reacting rashly never solves anything. True strength is staying calm enough to think things through carefully." She took a deep breath, considering his wisdom. There was power in quiet determination. It wasn't just about her discomfort anymore. It was about something far bigger. Maya wondered silently how many others had faced the same unjust treatment and simply stayed quiet, swallowing their hurt and resentment because they felt powerless to change anything. Her gaze rested softly upon Karen as the flight attendant moved through the aisle, her manner deceptively gracious towards certain passengers. Maya watched, determined and patient. She knew she needed more solid evidence, something indisputable if her voice was going to be heard. So she remained composed, gripping the phone gently in her hand, capturing every movement discreetly. Each subtle slight Karen delivered, just as Maya was shifting slightly in her seat. Feeling an ache from sitting still too long, she noticed a man several rows ahead. He was older, perhaps in his mid-50s, with short salt and pepper hair and a quiet, observant manner. He was subtly watching the situation unfold, his eyes keen and perceptive, clearly taking note of Karen's attitude and Maya's careful observation. A few minutes later, when Karen had walked past, the man turned slightly, making brief eye contact with Maya. His expression was mild, but clearly empathetic. She found herself somewhat curious, sensing he understood exactly what was going on. After a moment he stood up and quietly walked toward the restroom at the back, pausing briefly as he passed Maya's seat. He leaned slightly, lowering his voice to a gentle whisper. "I saw what happened. That wasn't right, was it?" Maya was startled at first, but quickly relaxed, sensing his genuine kindness. She returned a small, cautious smile and nodded gently, acknowledging his concern without giving away too much. Her instinct told her that he could be trusted, yet she decided to wait, gathering her thoughts carefully before fully opening up. The man gave her a thoughtful, reassuring nod, then quietly continued on his way. When he returned to his seat moments later, Maya watched him carefully from afar, intrigued by his quiet confidence. She wondered who he might be and why he had noticed her predicament so readily. Little did she know he was Ethan Wallace, a man who specialized in quietly observing situations like these every day, as an internal investigator within the airline industry. Today, though, he was simply a passenger on his own personal time, but his well-honed instincts never took a day off. Maya's attention shifted again as she overheard a soft, grandmotherly voice nearby. A pleasant-looking older woman, her gray hair neatly styled and glasses perched comfortably on her nose, gently waved Karen over. "Excuse me, dear," she called sweetly. "Could I trouble you for some orange juice?" Maya felt her heart quicken slightly, already predicting the outcome. Sure enough, Karen's demeanor shifted in an instant, softening visibly as she warmly responded. "Of course, ma'am. I'll be right back with your juice." Maya discreetly angled her phone, carefully capturing every nuance of the interaction. Her jaw tightened as she witnessed Karen handing over the drink moments later, a smile firmly in place, her voice dripping with sincerity. There was no hesitation, no curt refusal this time. It was exactly the kind of unmistakable favoritism Maya needed to document. Ethan Wallace also watched silently, noticing the pattern Maya had already caught. He began to see precisely what was happening. Karen wasn't random or inconsistent. She had her own quiet criteria, deciding quickly who deserved courtesy and who did not. It wasn't airline policy that drove her actions, but something uglier, something hidden behind her practiced smile. Maya released a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. There was no doubt now. Her father's teachings echoed again in her mind. Change begins with one brave act, one person unwilling to let injustice slip by unnoticed. Her chest tightened slightly, understanding now the weight of the situation and her responsibility in it. Maya's resolve hardened quietly as she carefully stored the evidence she had captured. There was much to do once the plane touched down, but for now she simply waited, biding her time, her emotions firmly controlled beneath the surface. She knew what needed to be done, and she was prepared to do it, calmly, deliberately, and decisively. Maya glanced down at her hands, taking a slow breath to steady herself. The growing discomfort inside the plane had become tangible. The passengers around her shifted quietly, sensing tension building with every passing moment. Still, she reminded herself of what her father always said. Sometimes patience and persistence reveal the truth more clearly than anger. Deciding to test this thought further, She waited until Karen was passing by once again. She lifted her hand slightly, catching Karen's attention. "Could I just have some water, please?" Maya asked softly, her voice deliberately gentle and polite. Karen hesitated, exhaling sharply as if Maya's request was an immense inconvenience. "I'll get it when I have time," Karen replied curtly, avoiding eye contact. Maya watched calmly as the attendant swiftly delivered beverages and snacks to other passengers nearby, her polite smile returning easily when interacting with others. Each moment of unnecessary delay in serving Maya was becoming more apparent to those seated around her. Maya could feel the eyes of fellow passengers quietly observing this unfairness. A woman seated across the aisle shook her head softly, offering Maya a sympathetic glance, silently acknowledging the clear bias. A young father 2 rows ahead caught her eyes and shrugged slightly in quiet frustration. Just then, Maya noticed a young Asian American couple a few rows ahead speaking softly to each other before politely signaling Karen. "Excuse me," the young woman asked kindly. "Could we possibly have some orange juice?" Karen's expression darkened instantly, irritation clear on her face. She answered briskly, her voice sharp and cold. "I'm sorry, as I told the other passenger. Orange juice is only available in business class." The couple glanced at each other, clearly confused. Just moments later, Karen walked right past their seats, smiling warmly and handing an orange juice to another passenger, a well-dressed white man who had just asked moments before. The young Asian American man exchanged a bewildered look with his companion, frustration finally boiling over. "Wait a second," he spoke up, voice filled with confusion and hurt. "You just told us we couldn't have orange juice. Why did you serve him without hesitation?" Karen stiffened visibly, turning to face them with a defensive posture, her voice rising in irritation. "Sir, I have already explained this. Please lower your voice, or I'll have no choice but to report you to security for disrupting the flight." Murmurs began to ripple through the cabin, passengers turning to watch the uncomfortable exchange. Maya's pulse quickened slightly as she saw Karen's discomfort grow more apparent. The young couple hesitated, looking around uncertainly, their faces reddening with embarrassment. Maya knew instantly this was her opportunity, her moment to speak up for herself and everyone else who had silently endured similar treatment. Gathering her composure, she stood slowly, feeling the curious eyes of the entire cabin shifting toward her. She kept her voice clear, firm, but respectful slowly, feeling the curious eyes of the entire cabin shifting toward her. She kept her voice clear, firm, but respectful, breaking the tension with calm authority. "Excuse me," Maya said just loudly enough for everyone around to hear clearly. "But can someone explain why certain passengers are refused orange juice while others get it without question?" Several passengers immediately nodded, their quiet voices softly echoing agreement. Karen turned sharply toward Maya, visibly caught off guard and increasingly agitated by the attention. Her cheeks flushed with anger as she narrowed her eyes, pointing a finger in Maya's direction. "Miss, if you continue to cause disruption, I'll have to report you to the captain." Maya took a steadying breath, her voice remaining even. "I'm not disrupting anything, ma'am. I'm simply asking a fair and honest question." As she spoke, Maya calmly took out her phone, slowly tapping the screen and turning the volume up. "Perhaps everyone here deserves to see exactly what I mean," she said softly, pressing play. A clear recording filled the air around them, Karen's own voice unmistakably sharp and biased, the exchange of words undeniable. Passengers around Maya craned their necks, mouths falling open in disbelief. Several whispered comments filled the silence that followed, astonishment mingling with outrage. Karen's face paled, eyes widening in sudden panic and embarrassment. Her carefully maintained composure cracked entirely, giving way to visible distress. She stared at Maya, lips parted, searching for some explanation, some defense. But none came. The truth hung heavily in the air between them, impossible to deny or dismiss. Maya stood silently, meeting Karen's stunned gaze without malice, just steady determination. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about revealing a deeper truth, forcing acknowledgement of an injustice that had gone unchallenged for too long. In that quiet, powerful moment, Maya understood something clearly. Her voice mattered. Her actions mattered. Most importantly, standing up quietly but decisively against injustice, no matter how small or trivial it might seem, could lead to real change. Karen stood frozen, eyes widening in disbelief as Maya's phone continued playing the recorded video. Suddenly, a rush of panic flashed across Karen's face, and without thinking clearly, she lunged forward, her hand reaching out desperately toward Maya's phone. Before Karen could grasp it, Ethan Wallace stood swiftly from his seat, calmly stepping between them. He spoke quietly, but with a firm tone, the kind of voice that instantly commanded respect. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. This young lady has every right to record public interactions." Karen's outstretched hand froze midair. She seemed startled by Ethan's intervention, a slight tremble visible in her fingertips. She quickly pulled her arm back, eyes flickering nervously from Ethan to Maya. The cabin around them had grown silent, passengers quietly turning their attention toward the unfolding drama. Karen seemed aware of all the eyes on her now, the quiet murmurs making her cheeks flush red with embarrassment. Maya met Ethan's eyes gratefully, feeling a surprising sense of comfort from the stranger's quiet authority. She gave him a slight nod, silently thanking him, but inside her thoughts were churning with uncertainty. Her heart raced as she considered her next move. A part of her wanted desperately to stand up immediately, to expose everything right there in front of everyone, to demand immediate justice and accountability. Yet another voice, more patient and reasoned, whispered gently from somewhere deep in her memory. The voice of her father, steady and wise. She could almost hear his words clearly in her head now. The loudest moment isn't always the best one for lasting change. Choose your battles carefully. The truth always finds its way out, one way or another. Maya exhaled slowly, calming her nerves, weighing the consequences of what might happen if she revealed the video right there on the plane. The flight could turn chaotic. Innocent passengers might become distressed. The entire journey disrupted. She knew from past experience that immediate confrontation rarely led to effective solutions. Only temporary outrage that faded as quickly as it appeared. She wanted real change, meaningful improvement, not just a brief explosion of outrage that would soon fade away. Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation, stepping closer and speaking gently, as though reading her mind. "I've seen enough situations like these in my line of work," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Let's handle this the right way once we land. I have connections. We'll make sure this gets to the right people." Maya felt a warm wave of relief wash over her. There was sincerity in Ethan's eyes, a genuine desire to make things right, not just for her, but for everyone else who'd been quietly suffering. She knew instantly she could trust him, and deep down she knew this was the smarter way to proceed. "Thank you," she whispered back softly, letting a brief, relieved smile pass over her lips. Her decision was clear now. She wouldn't cause further chaos in midair. The ground would be steadier beneath her feet, and justice would be clearer there. Meanwhile, Karen had retreated toward the galley, flustered and embarrassed. Visibly shaken by the sudden confrontation, her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted cups and cans, attempting to regain her composure. Another flight attendant approached her quietly, leaning in with a concerned expression and whispering discreetly, "You should be careful. That girl, she's been watching you closely." Karen stiffened visibly, a faint shiver running through her frame as she glanced nervously over her shoulder. Her eyes met Maya's briefly, anxiety flickering across her face. For the first time, she seemed genuinely worried, realizing she might have crossed a line she could no longer step back from. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fumbled to straighten the napkins and plastic cups on her cart, trying to appear composed, but clearly shaken. Maya noticed Karen's sudden discomfort from her seat, quietly absorbing it without satisfaction or pleasure. There was no joy in seeing someone anxious or fearful, even someone who had treated her unfairly. Yet it reassured her that the message had gotten through clearly. Maya gently slipped the phone back into her pocket, her chest feeling lighter now that she had a clear path ahead. She glanced at Ethan again, exchanging a knowing look that told her she wasn't alone in this. There was strength in numbers, in mutual understanding, and today she was not standing alone. She leaned back into her seat once more, eyes drifting out the window toward the city below. Her plan was clear. She was ready for whatever lay ahead, aware that the real challenge was still to come. But for now, the decision to wait filled her with quiet confidence. The plane continued smoothly toward Los Angeles, but the atmosphere in the cabin was noticeably different now. Passengers around Maya shifted restlessly in their seats, stealing glances at one another, their hushed conversations betraying curiosity and unease. The earlier calm had evaporated, replaced by whispered speculations about the confrontation they just witnessed. Maya felt a quiet tension building inside her chest, an uncomfortable blend of frustration and determination. She hated that familiar feeling of silent humiliation she had experienced too many times in her life. But today she knew it had to end differently. She reminded herself of her father's patient guidance, his gentle voice always steady and wise whenever he said, "Standing firm calmly is always stronger than shouting loudly." She glanced around, noticing a passenger 2 rows ahead discreetly glance her way, his expression empathetic yet uncertain, like he wished he could do something but didn't quite know how. It struck Maya deeply, making her wonder how many others had sat silently in seats like hers, enduring similar injustice, without the courage or means to speak up. Her thoughts were interrupted by the pilot's calm announcement, echoing gently through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've started our descent into Los Angeles. Please return your seats to their upright position, and thank you for flying with us." Maya drew a deep breath, preparing herself mentally for what awaited her on the ground. It was almost time. Beside her, Ethan Wallace cleared his throat gently, turning slightly to catch Maya's attention. His voice was steady, reassuring. "Once we land, let me handle the first step," he told her quietly, almost conspiratorially. "But you'll have the final say." Maya nodded slowly, appreciating the calm certainty in his tone. She trusted him instinctively, sensing his genuine intent. It gave her strength, knowing she wasn't alone in this moment. Yet deep inside, she also knew that whatever came next would shape more than just her own journey. It might well set an example for countless others who faced silent discrimination. As the aircraft descended gently, Karen passed by Maya once more. Her expression had shifted dramatically. The practiced composure was replaced by visible unease. Maya could see anxiety clouding Karen's eyes, the subtle signs of worry evident in her quickened breaths and the nervous way she adjusted her uniform collar. Then, unexpectedly, Karen leaned toward Maya, her voice shaking slightly with barely masked desperation. "Look, let's not make a big deal out of this," she said softly, trying to sound friendly, but failing miserably. "If you just forget about it, I'll get you whatever you want." Maya turned slowly, looking directly into Karen's anxious eyes. In that moment, her voice was clear and firm, devoid of anger, yet carrying an unmistakable finality. "It's too late for that," she said quietly but firmly. Karen's face went pale as Maya's words sank in. Her eyes widened, revealing panic and disbelief. Clearly she'd assumed Maya could be intimidated or appeased easily, just like countless others before. But this realization that Maya wasn't backing down shattered Karen's confidence completely. Her lips trembled as she stepped back, suddenly aware of the eyes of several passengers watching them, judging the scene carefully. Maya felt no satisfaction at seeing Karen's fear. Instead, she felt sadness at the need to have reached this point. Yet beneath that sadness was something stronger, a sense of justified clarity. Maya knew deep inside this wasn't just her fight anymore. It had become a symbol, a message to everyone who had silently tolerated prejudice and unfair treatment, because speaking up seemed too costly or difficult. As the wheels touched down softly on the runway, Maya looked out of small oval window, seeing Los Angeles sprawling out beneath the late afternoon sunlight. The plane began to slow, the gentle roar of engines subsiding to a comfortable hum. Passengers gathered their belongings, quietly murmuring to one another about the unusual drama they had just witnessed. Maya carefully gathered her belongings, heart steady and sure of what needed to happen next. She caught Ethan's glance again and saw encouragement reflected back in his eyes. Without words, they both understood that the real challenge awaited outside the aircraft doors, where truth couldn't be hidden and consequences were unavoidable. Maya felt a calm resolve settling over her as the plane slowed, guiding itself gently toward the gate. Whatever came next, she was ready. Her father's words echoed clearly in her mind once more. It only takes one person willing to stand firm for fairness to spark change. Today she was ready to be that person, quietly confident in the impact her actions might have beyond the single incident. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the cabin filled with quiet rustling as passengers prepared to exit. Maya took a steadying breath. Her decision made her path clear. The plane touched down gently at Los Angeles International Airport, and passengers began quietly collecting their belongings from overhead compartments. Soft murmurs replaced the earlier tension as people gathered their bags and prepared to disembark. Maya took her time, making sure she had everything neatly stowed before stepping into the aisle. Around her, there was a subdued, almost cautious energy as passengers glanced her way with mixed expressions, some approving, others simply curious. She felt Ethan's steadying presence just behind her as they moved slowly toward the exit door. Neither spoke, but his calm demeanor told her she was not alone. As Maya stepped through the plane's door onto the jet bridge, she spotted her father, David Reynolds, standing near the entrance, dressed in his familiar business suit, waiting patiently as he often did whenever he knew she was flying in. David Reynolds, standing near the entrance, dressed in his familiar business suit, waiting patiently as he often did whenever he knew she was flying in. David Reynolds was a tall, imposing man with a gentle presence, his dark eyes warm yet always alert. Karen, who had been nervously watching passengers leave, turned toward the exit and froze, her mouth dropping open slightly as recognition dawned. The realization visibly shook her. She hadn't expected this at all. She immediately straightened, smoothing her uniform nervously, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to panic. Maya approached her father calmly, ignoring Karen's stare. Without preamble, she pulled out her phone and handed it directly to David. Her voice was gentle but clear enough to be heard by the small group of airline staff stare. Without preamble, she pulled out her phone and handed it directly to David. Her voice was gentle but clear enough to be heard by the small group of airline staff who had gathered nearby. "I wanted you to see this before anyone else does," she said quietly. David raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that whatever was on the phone was serious. As he watched the footage, Maya saw his expression darken slowly, his jaw tighten slightly, and the warmth in his eyes shifted toward disappointment and quiet anger. Maya knew her father well enough to see he was deeply disturbed by what he had just witnessed. Karen nervously stepped forward, her voice trembling and desperate. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't know she was your daughter. I thought she was just some." She stopped abruptly, horrified at her own words as soon as they escaped her mouth. Maya felt the room still. Passengers around them paused in shock, whispering softly. Even Ethan's usually steady demeanor showed a slight tightening of his brow. David turned toward Karen, and his voice, though quiet, carried immense authority. "And that's exactly the problem," David said calmly but firmly, looking Karen squarely in the eyes. "If the only thing stopping you from treating passengers with dignity is their status or their connections, you have no place representing this airline." Karen's eyes filled with tears, her shoulders sagging under the heavy weight of realization. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The carefully maintained confidence she had worn throughout the flight was now utterly gone, replaced by defeat and embarrassment. Maya didn't feel triumphant or satisfied watching Karen crumble. Instead, a quiet sadness settled over her. It hurt to think that even today, people could hold such ingrained prejudice and biases, allowing it to dictate their actions and treatment of others. Yet Maya also knew it was necessary. Facing the truth was uncomfortable, but it was the only way real change could happen. Ethan moved slightly forward, softly touching David's shoulder, indicating he wished to speak. "Mr. Reynolds, this isn't isolated. People experience this far too often. It's deeper than just this one incident." David turned thoughtfully toward Ethan, absorbing his words carefully. Then his eyes found Maya again. She nodded gently, silently agreeing. David understood immediately. This wasn't about just one individual's mistake. It was an opportunity to correct a wider problem, something his daughter had been trying to convey all along. David sighed deeply, turning decisively to a member of the airline senior management standing close by. "Call HR. I want this handled now. She's done here." Karen visibly wilted further, her shoulders sagging. She began to say something else, perhaps an apology or a plea, but the words caught in her throat. The damage was done, her own words sealing her fate. Maya felt a heavy yet comforting hand on her shoulder as David leaned closer, whispering gently so only she could hear. "You did the right thing. This is bigger than both of us now." Maya nodded, taking a deep breath as Karen was quietly escorted away by another staff member. She understood now, perhaps better than ever before, that decisions like hers weren't about revenge or punishment. They were about creating meaningful change, about ensuring fairness and dignity for everyone. This was a step forward, a necessary step. She exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of relief mingled with the understanding that this was only the beginning. The real task of transforming this experience into lasting change still lay ahead, but she was ready. As Maya looked around at the faces watching her, she saw hope and understanding reflected clearly in their eyes, reminding her exactly why she had made this choice. Passengers exiting the plane paused, lingering curiously near the gate, sensing the tense scene unfolding nearby. Karen stood anxiously, her breathing shallow, eyes darting around nervously, as if seeking an escape. Maya felt a quiet weight in her chest. She wasn't excited or pleased, just resolute in her purpose. David stepped forward decisively, his presence commanding immediate attention. His voice was calm yet powerful, resonating clearly so that everyone nearby could hear him. Turning to Karen, he spoke firmly. "Karen, I've seen the footage. Can you explain yourself?" Karen hesitated, eyes darting back and forth. She fidgeted, clutching the hem of her uniform nervously, searching for words that wouldn't come. Her voice shook as she finally spoke, her tone pleading. "Mr. Reynolds, please, this was just a misunderstanding. I was just following the company guidelines." David held up a hand to silence her, his tone stern but composed. "No, Karen, there's no such policy in our company. You acted on your own prejudice." His words hung in the air, resonating with the passengers who'd stopped to watch. Several of them began nodding slowly, a few quietly exchanging approving murmurs. At least 2 passengers, phones in hand, were discreetly recording the confrontation, clearly aware that something significant was happening. Karen seemed to shrink beneath their stares, shoulders slumping visibly. Her eyes glistened with tears, embarrassment mixing sharply with panic. Her carefully cultivated authority had dissolved completely, leaving only desperation behind. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke, almost pleading, "Mr. Reynolds, I honestly didn't know she was your daughter. I thought she was just some—" David raised his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. His gaze narrowed sharply. "And that's exactly the problem, Karen. It doesn't matter who she is. Every passenger deserves equal respect and courtesy." Karen stood in stunned silence as the weight of David's words settled heavily around her. She visibly wilted, all the fight and defiance gone from her posture. Her shoulders dropped, and a faint flush of humiliation crept across her cheeks. She seemed smaller, diminished, aware that her mistake had now been fully exposed. Maya watched quietly, feeling neither victorious nor triumphant. She took no pleasure in Karen's visible humiliation, only sadness that it had come to this. Yet she knew in her heart that silence in these situations was complicity, and that speaking up had been absolutely necessary. She turned to her father, her voice gentle yet unwavering. "Dad, this can't just end with her." David's eyes softened as he looked at his daughter. He knew exactly what she meant. Maya wasn't seeking personal vengeance. She wanted lasting, meaningful change. David nodded slowly in agreement, understanding fully the responsibility resting upon his shoulders. "I agree," David said decisively, turning toward the airline executives who had quietly joined him near the gate. "This must never happen again. I want immediate changes in our training and hiring procedures. Start a complete internal review. We need to understand exactly how these attitudes slip through our process." Ethan Wallace watched silently from a short distance, smiling subtly in approval. He recognized that Maya and her father weren't just addressing Karen's individual behavior, but were confronting something far deeper within the airline's culture. He knew firsthand that internal change was rarely easy, but deeply necessary. He respected Maya's calm courage, appreciating the strength she'd shown in this challenging moment. Nearby, Karen appeared utterly defeated, realizing her career had effectively ended in that instant. Her shoulders slumped, eyes fixed blankly on the floor as security personnel quietly approached to escort her away. The hush among the passengers around them deepened, everyone keenly aware they had just witnessed an important moment of reckoning. An elderly woman standing nearby gently touched Maya's arm, her eyes warm and encouraging. "Good for you, dear," she said quietly, her voice soft and compassionate. Someone had to do something about people like her. Maya offered the woman a slight, appreciative smile. Her pulse had settled, replaced now by calm resolve. The approval around her felt reassuring, but the quiet encouragement from the older woman touched her deeply, reminding her of why she had spoken out in the first place. As Karen was guided away, Maya's thoughts shifted to the broader picture. This wasn't just about her or one isolated incident. This was about a bigger change that needed to happen. It was about ensuring that no one else would feel unseen or mistreated again, at least not on her father's airline. The weight of that responsibility was immense, yet Maya felt surprisingly steady and clear. She had chosen a difficult path, but it was the right one, the only path toward genuine justice. Quiet strength and determination had been her guide, just as her father had taught her. As passengers resumed their journeys, softly discussing what they'd witnessed, Maya knew that this was only the beginning. She felt no sense of victory, only resolve, a quiet confidence that her voice mattered, and that perhaps this single act of bravery could lead to lasting improvements for everyone else. Maya sat quietly in her father's car, watching the city streets pass by through the tinted windows. Her thoughts felt heavy, yet strangely hopeful. David sat beside her, his normally calm face thoughtful and serious as they drove away from the airport. After several silent minutes, he finally spoke, his voice quiet and filled with a heavy sincerity Maya rarely heard from him. "I never thought this was happening under my own company," David said softly, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "But clearly I was wrong to assume otherwise." Maya turned toward her father, studying his face thoughtfully. She saw the genuine disappointment in his eyes, the quiet hurt of someone who realized his blind spots had allowed injustice to fester. Maya felt a deep tenderness toward him in that moment, not just as his daughter, but as someone who understood how heavy responsibility could weigh. "This isn't just about Karen, Dad," she gently reminded him. "It's about all the others out there facing this kind of treatment every day. People who feel powerless to speak up. We need to fix that." David nodded slowly, the car rolling quietly down the highway as the Los Angeles skyline shimmered in the afternoon sun. "You're right, Maya. It's clear we have work to do. Real change, lasting change, is going to start right now." Within a day, the airline issued an official statement regarding Karen's termination. It was clear and straightforward, acknowledging that her behavior had violated company policy on equality and respect. There was no vague wording, no attempt to minimize the seriousness of what had happened. David personally signed the memo, clearly signaling to every employee that discrimination would never be tolerated, no matter the situation. Within days, a broader internal investigation began, quietly but thoroughly reviewing practices and behaviors across the entire company. Employees from various departments began stepping forward, sharing anonymously and openly experiences they'd long kept quiet, many noting that Karen's biased treatment wasn't an isolated occurrence. Several former staff even spoke up publicly, describing incidents they'd witnessed, but had felt powerless to stop at the time. As news spread about the internal reforms, former and current employees expressed relief that finally something meaningful was being done. Ethan Wallace personally oversaw much of the investigative process, ensuring fairness and transparency at every step. He became a quiet but steady ally, a symbol of integrity within the organization. David wasted no time launching a rigorous new training initiative, emphasizing respect, sensitivity, and equal treatment of every passenger. Attendance in anti-discrimination classes became mandatory for all flight crew members, with strict new standards introduced to ensure accountability. Supervisors were instructed to observe closely, evaluating behaviors openly, making it clear that prejudice or disrespectful treatment would lead immediately to serious consequences. A hotline was also established, allowing passengers to report any unfair treatment directly to management, promising swift action whenever such incidents occurred. The message was clear. David's company would not only respond to incidents, but proactively work to ensure they never happened again. As news of these reforms spread, Maya watched quietly, feeling hopeful, yet aware that meaningful change required constant vigilance. She began receiving messages from passengers she'd never met, thanking her for stepping forward, sharing their own stories of being treated unfairly. Each message reminded her how important that single moment of courage had been, reaffirming that even quiet actions could speak louder than any heated confrontation. Several weeks later, Maya received an email from her father with a simple yet powerful subject line: "Change starts with one person." Curious, she clicked on the link, watching a short video. On screen, a newly trained flight attendant warmly greeted passengers, her interactions visibly genuine, thoughtful, and equitable. There was sincerity in her smile, kindness in her tone, and unmistakable respect extended to each passenger equally. Maya felt her heart swell gently with pride. Not pride in herself, but pride in knowing her small act had sparked a genuine, lasting transformation. She hadn't just spoken up for herself. She had opened the door to meaningful change, one that could touch countless lives. She leaned back, a peaceful smile spreading across her lips, fully understanding that real transformation began quietly, almost invisibly, sparked by a single act of courage. It had been uncomfortable, stressful even, but it had been necessary. And looking at the screen, Maya felt a deep satisfaction in knowing she had been the one brave enough to stand firm when it mattered most. It wasn't pride she felt now. It was purpose, a gentle certainty that every person had power if they chose to use it. One quiet voice, steady and brave enough to speak up, could indeed shift an entire culture. As the video ended, Maya exhaled softly, feeling lighter, clearer, and profoundly grateful that she'd found the courage when it mattered most. True change doesn't come from loud battles. It comes from small moments of courage, from one person willing to stand up when no one else will. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. She simply let the truth speak for itself. And in doing so, she didn't cause a scene. She simply let the truth speak for itself. And in doing so, she didn't just expose one person's prejudice. She helped change an entire system. So the next time you witness something unfair, what will you do? Will you stay silent, or will you be the voice that sparks change? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the way we see the world. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? What would you have done?